One of the ways in which plants are used by people that is quite provocative and has drawn a lot of research and other interest by ethnobotanists is the area in which plants are used to either alter perception, to help people to relax, or to help people to communicate with each other, or to communicate with the spirit world beyond. All of these can be tied up in a topic that we can think of as entering another world. Most cultures have incorporated the usage of some psychoactive compounds or plants into their religions, medicines, and other social structures. This incorporation usually includes rules and conditions for appropriate usage, basically patterns that are followed within society and that everybody tends to abide by. In addition, most cultures also restrict or prohibit access to some psychoactive compounds or plants. Now, it may be restrictions as to the time in which they're used, the place in which they're used, or who specifically uses them, but there's usually some kind of restrictions that are involved. And finally, it's really only in modern global cultures where we find that recreational plants are perceived as primarily being recreational, or considered to be appropriate for individual usage in non-culturally significant situations. The idea that somebody might use a psychoactive substance all alone, off in some dark room, all by themselves, is a really kind of odd thing that tends to be characteristic of global culture and not really traditional cultures around the world. The context in which a plant is used is pretty important, and this is particularly true of plants that alter your perception of the world around you. And this becomes even more important when we consider plants that are used within religious contexts. Within this, we have several aspects that we can think about how plants are incorporated that deal with the context. The first is the basics of the usage. How is a plant used? Is it being used, is it smoked? Is it consumed whole? Does it need to be processed in some way, made into some kind of a product? Exactly how is it being used? The second is the types of controls that are involved. How is the dosage regulated? How is the access to it controlled? How is it determined by the community who gets to use it and when? The third is, what are the specific actions? What are the effects that people who are using these substances want or want to avoid? What are the whole suite of actions that occur, both positive and negative, and how are these regulated? Fourth, what are the belief systems that are involved? So when a particular action happens, how do people interpret that within that particular society? What do they think that it means is happening to them? Is this some kind of a pharmacological interpretation? Is it a religious interpretation? What is it? All of that is tied up in the belief system of the community. And then finally, there's the setting in which the usage and the action all takes place. And the setting is probably one of the most important aspects of traditional usage of psychoactive substances in particular, because the setting dictates a lot of the other stimuli that are coming into your body that then are interpreted within light of the plant substance that's on board. So the setting could include the kinds of music that are being played or total silence. It could include lots of light, or it could be under total darkness. All of these things affect the way in which the effects of the plant are perceived and interpreted. Together, all of this is the context in which a plant is used. And to really understand the role of plants that are involved in communication with people and communication with other worlds, we really need to understand all of these aspects of context. Quite often when a plant is used to alter people's perception or to enhance communication, it is used in conjunction with a larger set of plants as a mixture. Mixtures are put together in order to regulate the effectiveness, the side effects, and sometimes there's plants that are added to a particular mixture because of a symbolic role. So when we consider the effectiveness, you can have one plant that enhances the effectiveness of another plant. And we have quite a few examples of this with plants such as ayahuasca, which are enhanced by the addition of other plants that make them more biologically active. Sometimes a plant is added to regulate side effects. There may be a drowsiness or vomiting or some other side effect that occurs that's undesirable, and by adding in one or two additional plants, you're able to control and minimize that side effect. And then lastly, the role of symbolism is kind of an important one that's probably often overlooked and ends up being masked in the literature on this subject. So if you have a plant that represents a particular deity and you want that deity to be present in whatever it is that's happening, that plant may be included in a mixture even though the plant itself does not really alter your perceptions. It's there more symbolically to show that you are inviting that deity to participate. There's a lot more subtle ways in which a plant can be brought to bear in a symbolic way. It could be that a plant is simply sitting in the area where a mind-altering substance is consumed, and therefore that's part of what's happening. It could be that the plant that is symbolic is a focus where you're supposed to look at a particular tree or bush, etc. All of those can be symbolic roles of plants. The effects of plants are most commonly divided into four main categories: hallucinogens, depressants, stimulants, and things that we reckon to be non-bioactive. This is really a pharmacologist's way of looking at plants, and it's probably not terribly consistent with any cultural perspective other than that of a modern pharmacologist. And in fact, there's even arguments amongst pharmacologists as to whether these are viable ways of dividing things up. However, we're going to talk about them using these categories because these are the categories that you'll find in the literature and that you'll find people using in a lot of discussions out there. There's obviously a large number of other terms, some of which are synonyms for these, and some of which are terms that are put out there to be more politically correct. For instance, the term entheogen is often used, and this is a term that's been used quite often recently. But it's a term that's obviously politically charged itself. From a pharmacological perspective, hallucinogens change brain chemistry and the processing that occurs therein in order to produce either visual, auditory, olfactory, or tactile sensations. Fundamentally, what this means is that something that is called a hallucinogen modifies the perception of the individual of what they see, hear, smell, or feel. And in order to measure this, we would have to have one person who is not under the influence of a particular plant substance and another person who is, and the difference between the two of them, as far as their sensations goes, would be the hallucinogenic effect. Many concentrated plant extracts and plants are involved in the creation of a hallucinogenic effect. Some of the more commonly recognized plants include belladonna, henbane, mandrake, datura, and the angel's trumpets, all of these being from the Solanaceae family. Ayahuasca, marijuana, peyote and San Pedro, epena, mescal bean, and salvia. So there's lots and lots of plants. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as plants that are hallucinogenic in property. The second category of biologically active plants are those that are considered to be depressants. Depressants decrease sensory input, or at least decrease the perception of sensory input. They may also decrease brain activity, although at the same time there may also be an acceleration of another part of the brain's activity. There's quite a number of plants that are involved, both extracts, resins, and saps of these plants, and this includes plants such as kava, opium that includes within it morphine, codeine, and the derivative heroin, and reserpine. Stimulants increase sensory input and may increase brain activity. Although once again, just as with depressants, although there may be activity increased in one part of the brain, it may also be decreased in another part of the brain. And so there's somewhat of a balance between stimulants and depressants, that they both are doing similar kinds of activities, and we're really measuring based upon the dominant theme rather than the simple theme. Some examples of plants that are considered to be stimulants include coca leaf, tobacco, khat, ephedra, coffee, tea, and coca, or chocolate. Some non-bioactive plants are also used in mixtures. These oftentimes represent plant parts that do not cause known biological activity, although after time we sometimes learn what the actual biological activity is, and it turns out that it was just something so subtle that we didn't realize what was going on. These may be modifying the activity of other plants, they may be diluting effects, they may be decreasing effects, or they may be included for lots of other reasons. As I mentioned, they may be there for a symbolic role. When considering the roles of psychoactive substances within traditional societies and in modern society, there's three aspects that really need to be thought about that relate to kind of some general phenomena. The first of these is that psychoactive substances usually lie along a continuum where we'll find that a plant may be at one concentration of food, maybe at another concentration of medicine, at another concentration a psychoactive substance, and yet at a higher concentration a poison. And so virtually every plant that exists that is edible can also be used medicinally, and if it's a medicinal plant, it can usually be used as a psychoactive substance given enough of a dosage, and if it's a psychoactive substance at a high enough dosage, it is poisonous. Now, the problem with this is that the range on these is highly variable. There are some psychoactive substances that the dosage difference between that of a desirable effect, desirable psychoactive effect, and a poisonous effect may be really close. And there's others where that range may be so great that it's really difficult to reach a poisonous level, and so people are free to use them in a wide dosage range. And this variability really affects the way that people use plants. So those plants that have a very narrow dosage range are the ones that are most commonly administered by cultural specialists. Somebody who's able to watch carefully and know if a person is getting enough or if they're getting too much, so that they don't accidentally kill somebody. The second general feature is that in a traditional society, plants are most commonly consumed as part of mixtures. Now, in modern society, we actually do the opposite, where we go to the effort of extracting a single molecule out of a plant so that that can be consumed. A good example of this is going from coca leaves to cocaine, where it's been extracted and concentrated and purified, and then it's that single molecule that's consumed instead of a whole leaf substance. And there's a rather long list of plants where this is the case, where the traditional society uses a whole plant and the modern society uses a single molecule extracted from it. On top of that, the traditional society is oftentimes using not just even that one whole plant, but a mixture of plants. The third general feature to keep in mind when we're thinking about psychoactive substances is that there's a lot of terminology problems involved. So within global society, the term narcotic often comes up. This is a term that scientifically, pharmacologically, has a really specific meaning. It refers to anything that causes sleep. And yet we have a large number of plants that are considered to be narcotics by the police that clearly do not cause sleep. So there's a kind of a cultural meaning that's come up that basically in this case means any illegal substance. And so the terminology that gets used is really sloppy when it comes to these substances. And there's probably a good reason for this. The first is that terms are created by scientists who have a narrow meaning for them, but then the term actually is functional within broader society where people may not really understand that scientific meaning. In addition, the plants themselves and the molecules that come out of them don't always elicit a single effect. So it's quite common for a plant to cause a hallucinogenic effect, to be stimulating, and be depressant all at the same time, a single plant or a single mixture. So how do you classify something like that? Well, generally people just pick a category and stick it into it, even though these plants, are kind of disregarding the classification system. So we're now going to look at some of the more important psychoactive plants that are found around the world. The first of these is cannabis. Cannabis is clearly the most widely distributed psychoactive plant around the world, found in virtually every country on many, many different kinds of substrates, growing in temperate zones all the way into the most extreme tropics. The plant goes by many names, some of which hide it and some of which reveal interesting history. Names include bhang, daga, ganja, hashish, hemp, and marijuana. Some of its most ancient usage is in India and in the areas that surround the Himalayas, both on the north side of the Himalayas in the southern Russian steppe and on the south side in India, Nepal, Bhutan. The plant has been carried around Asia and on into Africa and Europe by ancient horsemen who lived in the Russian steppes over into the Caucasus Mountains. These people served as raiders and barbarian hordes invading into different parts of Asia and Europe and transferring the plant into parts of Africa. In India, bhang was used to attain spiritual delight as a source of courage and for heightened sexual desire. The plant is considered to be a sacred gift of the gods, and it's consumed as part of ascetic rituals that lead to enlightenment in several different Buddhist and Hindu traditions. It is specifically used to facilitate deep meditation and heightened awareness states. All of the parts of the plant may be used for ritual purposes. Now, some of the literature discusses there being multiple species of cannabis, particularly there being 3 species, one of which is a hemp variety, one of which is a psychoactive variety, and the other is some kind of an intermediate. The reality is there's probably just one species with quite a lot of different varieties. Remember that the presence of many different varieties of a plant is a good indicator of lots of human selection activity in the past. And this is a plant where people have clearly been selecting, but have also been selecting for different kinds of features. So for this presentation, we're primarily concerned with the selection for psychoactive properties, but it's important to realize that probably most of the selection pressure has been for fiber purposes. And so we find lots of this plant being grown for fibers, for ropes, paper, etc. The second example is from West Africa. This is the plant Tabernanthe boga. The name of the plant in most of the area where it's grown is iboga, and this literally means a guide to the ancestors. The context in which iboga is used is rather interesting. Iboga is used by the Bwiti cult and other secret societies in Gabon and the Congo, where it is employed in initiation ceremonies. Iboga is considered to be an ancestor who is able to guide cult initiates and sorcerers to more powerful ancestors. Consuming the plant sometimes causes death, so its usage is considered as a serious act. Iboga is used in group activities, even if it is for individual benefits. The plant is dug up, the roots are then shredded and ground, and this is then consumed in a ritual form of communication. One interesting point to note is that iboga is a relative of both the plumeria and mylae that are so familiar in Hawaii. And so when you look at these other plants, plumeria and mylae, you might think about the fact that some of their close cousins around the world are used for much more profound ritual purposes. The third example is from South America. This is Banisteriopsis cappii. The plant has a number of names, including ayahuasca, or the vine of the soul. Ayahuasca is used for communications with spirits and ancestors. It may be employed by those seeking information about current problems, those seeking a life plan, or by healers seeking to determine the cause and cure of an illness. Ayahuasca is viewed as a god and is deeply rooted in local mythologies and world philosophies. When this plant is used, it creates quite profound visions. The bark of the vine is usually boiled down into a liquid that is used as the hallucinogen or as part of a mixture of other plant products. And in fact, this is one of these plants that is typically consumed in a mixture with a number of other plant parts involved that greatly enhance its effectiveness. Here you see a shot of me next to a large ayahuasca vine on the Big Island. There's quite a lot of these around in Hawaii. Some of these are being used, and others are simply growing in people's yards as unrecognized plants. The fourth example is from the Pacific. This is Piper methysticum, or kava. This plant goes by a number of other names as well, including yongona and sakau, and in Hawaii, ava. It is used in Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, but is of greatest importance in Polynesia. Kava is usually consumed in groups. If used formally, it often plays a role in relaxing intergroup tensions and setting the mood and pace of any group discussions. Some have said that this is the official plant of peace of the Polynesians. As such, it serves to modify and alter the group's considerations of time, status, and motivations. Kava consumed recreationally may serve some of the same purposes, but is more likely consumed for depressant effects than social integration or time-altering effects. Next, we want to consider a list of plant hallucinogens. And what I want you to think about when you look at this list is several issues that relate to those of us here in Hawaii. These plants are all found growing in Hawaii. They're all being used in Hawaii. And yet, the people who originally domesticated these and developed all of the cultural context in which they were used are, for the most part, not here. Or the plants are being used by people who did not develop them, even though the people may be here. So please think about what the implications are of people using a set of plants that are new to them, really, culturally, and for which they really don't know what the social controls and opportunities and meanings are that have been developed in another culture somewhere else in the world.